Max Olson is normally with us on Thursdays, but he was busy, and we know why, because he and Bruce Feldman, with a column Tampering Confidential in college football, it's inevitable and impossible to stop. We've had Jeff Traylor, among others, who have discussed it. When UNT's coach Seth Luttrell has mentioned that too. Joined by Max Olson with Craig and Paul, I'm David Smoak. Max, thanks for your time. This story was inevitable too. How much interest did you have as you kind of wind through all of the various stories?
Yeah, it's I appreciate y'all having me on and talking about it. You know, it's one of those stories that comes from Bruce and I both like kind of having a lot of conversations with people in the past few weeks. And like, this is just like kind of the topic that kept coming up with people. I think part of that is because you have that spring transfer window, and yeah, there's not maybe a ton of like great players going in the portal at this time, but there's a lot of people who were very like nervous about this deadline and like, am I going to lose one of my best players at the last minute here? So I'm going to Tamper and we're going to like lose some really good players here who we can't really replace. So I think there was some anxiety about that in April for sure with coaches, and you've got obviously a lot of teams that are looking to fill their needs, and certainly in the age we're in right now, you know, you're not just looking at the guys who are already in the portal. These schools are already evaluating players on other people's rosters, and you know, if you've got a collective, you're probably reaching out and trying to contact them in some way and saying, hey, you can be a starter here and make some money and things like that. So, you know, certainly those two coaches you mentioned are great examples of there's a lot of you know, good programs at the Group of Five level, especially that have lost a lot of starters and all conference caliber guys over the past 2 years here to the portal. And they know it's not just because those guys are trying to move up as much as that's justified. They know that other coaches are getting in their ear and convincing them to leave.
Max, in the title of the column, it's impossible to stop. That's the thing I think that's got to sting the most is I don't know if there's any kind of way you could even attempt to regulate it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that when you talk with folks about how it works and you know, oftentimes it's kind of them trying to put the pieces together after they lost the kid of what happened here. How did this come together? And yeah, it's incredibly easy to communicate that interest. If you can find any third party, it could be the old high school coach or junior college coach, it could be the 7-on-7 coach, the trainer. You know, these kids have agents now. There's agents who want to represent these kids who are happy to reach out to them and say, hey, I can help you get some money at this school or whatever. You know, it's very easy to communicate that interest to a kid that, hey, you know, here's the kind of a number we're throwing around and here's how interested we are in you. And, you know, we've heard lots of stories in making calls on this week from coaches who are like, yeah, some guy came in and tampered and got him to go into the portal, and they didn't even sign him. Like, they didn't even pull it off. But, you know, even just getting approached by these guys and getting some sense that you're worth more can definitely be tempting to go in and kind of go through free agency like that. So it's very easy to kind of get in these kids' heads. And then it's just very difficult to prosecute this stuff, you know, to really have enough evidence and screenshots and receipts and all that kind of stuff to actually, you know, get the NCAA to do something about it. And a lot of these coaches just don't. They'll take it to their compliance people and maybe have their compliance person call the other school's compliance person. But in terms of actually going after this, you know, seriously pursuing NCAA charges and stuff, I think a lot of coaches, they either are reluctant to do it or don't really believe the NCAA would do anything if they turned it over.
Max, with the coaches that you guys talked to, was there anybody offering up any solutions on their end? Not so much as like the NCAA comes in and they fix things. We know that's not going to happen. That's a pipe dream at this point. But how are they trying to counteract? What kind of solutions are they trying to come up with on their own to try and curtail this as much as humanly possible?
Yeah, I mean, I think you still try to like build a program where you are recruiting really good players and developing them, and you hope that like the relationships that you have with them like still matter. I've talked to coaches at Group of Five schools who don't have that much money in terms of collective and NIL and things like that, but they're trying to raise it and they're trying to invest it in retaining their best players. I think that using that money to try to take care of your good players is way more useful than trying to buy any high school recruits or portal recruits, honestly. And so they're trying to raise the money and trying to invest that in their guys and show them enough love, knowing that, that people are going to come for them, but maybe they're willing to kind of take a little bit of a discount to stay put. But yeah, I mean, I think it's in terms of like truly getting it to stop, like, you honestly, you hope that you're close enough with your players that they bring it to you when it happens. And in a lot of cases, like, that's just not going to happen. The guy's going to, kind of line up where he's going to go, and he's going to go in the portal. And honestly, by the time they enter, it's already over. You've already lost. And so, because you just don't see these guys come back to school very often. And so, you have to try to get ahead of this stuff way in advance and really nurture those relationships, especially when we're in December, January, and April when it's open season.
Probably one of the most outspoken, and I'm not saying any of those quotes were his, but we've had Jeff Traylor on a lot, and he has been very vocal about the tampering. He was able to weather the storm, then all of a sudden Zachary Franklin entered the transfer portal late in the spring. Is there also a part of any coach who might have evidence that someone's tampering that they themselves are tampering too?
Well, what do you mean by that part?
Like if somebody is tampering with players of program X, isn't almost everybody getting some sort of a heads up on bringing somebody else into their program to fill the spots too?
Yeah, I think that's the tricky thing. I think that certainly like plays into, I think that plays into why we don't see people going public with allegations very often. Like you would think like these coaches are really frustrated. You would think that they take this stuff very personally. Obviously they invest a lot into these players and then they lose them. Like you would think they're calling out schools and coaches in press conferences and stuff like that. And like, it'd be hard not to, but I think there is a part of that in the coaches we talked with that like, yeah, there is kind of that, like, people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones a little bit, that like, if you want to be out here and saying somebody's doing wrong, you're inviting that scrutiny, and other coaches who might say the same about you. And so I'm not going to sit here and say every single coach out here and every school is doing it, but I think certainly enough of them are and feel like they kind of have to. And, everyone's just trying to hold on to their jobs and hold on to their players. And certainly, it's tough. Like it's tough. And that's where I understand that it might seem hypocritical to some people who read this stuff that like, well, these guys should put their name on it if they're that mad about it and stuff. And I certainly understand that perspective, but you also like, we gave them anonymity in this story so that they can kind of share what's really going on here, because oftentimes people are very reluctant to actually open up about what they've experienced.
Max, Smokey asked you about kind of the honor among thieves thing there, but yeah, how do they address this like openly at the coaches convention and just give an ethics seminar?
They certainly talk about it, but it's one of those things where it's like these guys all say, man, this is a big problem. But when you ask what's the solution, like, I think they say, well, yeah, stricter punishments would be good. We're all for that and stuff. But I, at the same time, like, how does that actually work? And who really is going to support that? Because, if it were just as simple as we've got this screenshot and we're sending it along, like I can see that. I can see like, all right, we've got some evidence, something should happen here. But there's also, as you guys know well, like, just the pace of these kinds of investigations is not really, doesn't really work for this cycle and the way these things go. A kid goes in the portal and he's got a new school within 2 weeks. And so you just don't feel like the NCAA can do anything to stop a kid from going somewhere, even if you know that somebody involved with that program, tampered with the kid and convinced them to go in the portal or talk to them before they were in the portal. And so, in terms of like how these guys hold each other accountable, I think certainly the quotes from Pat Narduzzi were really interesting. And I know he wants to see more people speak up like he did, but at the same time, those guys kind of know they take a PR hit because it might not look very good. It might look a little bit vindictive to go after players that they lost or go after coaches that signed the guys that they used to coach.
Max, I was lamenting how it's amazing. We went from, paying players is bad to now you can pay, but now it's become shadier than ever, and it's legal to pay. It's amazing how that's worked out. But amidst that shadiness, did you guys get any real sense of how much of this is true NIL as defined the way that it began and what it was supposed to be versus what is just now throwing money at whoever, whenever, however? Is some of this, a good portion of this, or little to none of this, actual real NIL the way it was supposed to be, so there's really nothing to investigate versus, the complete opposite in what everybody's fear kind of was originally?
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing in this conversation with coaches. Like, I didn't talk to anybody who was like, these kids shouldn't be making money, or these kids are being offered too much, they don't deserve it, things like that. I think everyone is like starting to kind of like accept that like that they are worth it and stuff like that. I don't think people are trying to like say it's wrong of these kids to make more money by going to a different school. I think their frustration is with the contact and with, I think they want it to be more of a fair game where, no one is recruiting these guys until they enter the transfer portal. And so, yeah, in terms of certainly like we hear lots of stories from these coaches about, pay for play, about where, this kid's being offered 6 figures and other perks to transfer. And obviously they're hard for us to, substantiate and corroborate and stuff like that. It's obviously very hard for the NCAA to do the same. But yeah, I mean, certainly like there's got to be some deliverables in terms of the NIL deals that they're getting at these places. But in terms of dealing with coaches and collectives and stuff, yeah, it's certainly, like, it's very clearly inducement to transfer. And again, NCAA doesn't really know how to get their arms around this stuff unless people start turning each other in.
Do you have an idea of how many people or players who transfer are actually getting tampered with? Is there any? Is it 15%, 50%? Golly, there's so many players in the portal.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's hard for me to judge that, really. I mean, I think you talk with, you call a coaching staff, especially at some of these Group of 5 schools, and they can easily list off 3, 4, 5 guys that they know were tampered with. Now, do they not know about some other ones, or is it really just a small number of their best players that that's the case? I mean, look, I'm not going to sit here and say, like today, a safety, Jalen Key from UAB committed to Alabama after going in the portal. That's 200 Group of 5 scholarship players who are going to transfer to Power 5 players for the 2023 season. I'm not going to sit here and say all 200 of them were tampered with, but certainly there's a lot, and certainly there's like a lot of very good players there who believe they're Power 5 players and want to move up, and so that kind of makes sense that they probably would be looking to do this anyways. But certainly in terms of people reaching out to them during the season, honestly, I hear a lot of stories too of guys that, like, yeah, people were reaching out to them in December, they didn't go in the portal, and now they're trying again in the spring. Like, I think these guys are kind of dealing with this constantly. And, how much is it happening? Like, is it just the best players? Honestly, from the coaches I talk to, if it's like a starter, like, there's a chance that it's happening to them. It's not just these 4-star, 5-star, like everybody wants them as soon as they hit the portal. I've talked with coaches who are trying at their hardest to hold on to guys who are like 1-year starters who are like pretty good, who are being offered money. So I think right now it's just kind of a crazy market.
Well, that was Jalen Key, right? Like, he wasn't really a regular starter until last year.
That's right. But he's experienced, and he's a safety, and there's not many safeties in the portal, and he's got the right, frame that people are looking for. And that's part of what's kind of crazy about this time is that, these schools will really find you anywhere. Like, if you're a school like Alabama and you're like, we want a 6'2" safety for depth or to start or whatever for our defense, then they can go look up every kid that's out there in the country and go break down the tape very easily of who they like and don't like. And I'm not saying Alabama did do this with Jalen Key, and I'm not saying they have to in some cases, but I mean, they're Alabama. But certainly they can go using PFF and all these resources they have, they can go evaluate and grade every kid out there. And either get them when they're in the portal or, figure out a way to convince them to go in the portal.
You got a question? John Bolster on our chat room made this comment. You are also burning a bridge to a job when you eventually are looking for one down the road. If you turn in another coach, that's a possibility. Yeah.
I think that's true. I think that, honestly, I talked with another coach who said, I'll never turn someone in because ultimately, as much as these things piss me off, like, I know everybody else is like trying to hold on to their job and feed their family and stuff like that. And look, I think these coaches have to realize at this point, some of these kids are trying to do the same thing. I think it's hard to fault them. I mean, there's lots of coaches who, throughout their career, it's like, why did you go from this job to that job? Well, I made a little bit more money and I got a better title. I mean, that's what they all do. So it's kind of, at the same time, you can't speak out of both sides of your mouth here. Like, yeah, it's frustrating when people come for your players, stuff like this, but it's hard to fault the player for taking advantage of what's in front of them here and trying to have a better opportunity and a little bit more money at the next spot.
Yeah, that's why it's an impossible argument to defeat right now, right? Is the loyalty thing. You just quickly point out, well, coaches do it, and there's just no answer to that. It's true. Like, yeah, they have that freedom of movement. They jump for money. They jump for better opportunities, and you can't argue with that when a player does the same thing. So I think that's where we always circle back to, and it's like, well, yep, it's what are you going to do about it? But, Mac, I was just wondering, what is the kind of the balance? I know there's always the numbers about the guys who have gone up a level, but how does it balance out as far as the guys that go down a level? And this is kind of a two-pronged question because I don't know if you know that number, but with that in mind, your thoughts on TJ Finley ending up with GJ Kinney at Texas State and also joining Malik Hornsby there as well?
Yeah, I mean, there is really, the more I follow the transfer portal and kind of track where everyone's going, you really kind of see very clearly the food chain that comes with all this. And it's not just guys moving up. I mean, certainly there's, these Group of 5 schools can end up benefiting from these Power 5 players that bounce after a couple seasons, whether they just didn't earn enough playing time or had some issues or whatever it is. Like, you can certainly find some pretty talented players that it didn't work for them at the Power 5 level, but they're certainly good enough to be starters and maybe even like all conference type of players if they're willing to come to a G5 school. So that's the thing. Everyone also wants to like kind of maintain good relationships here, because you want to be able to, get those kinds of players when they go in the portal. And there's certainly some guys that can come down because they just like a TJ Finley want playing time, just kind of, maybe they've got a year left or something like that. And they just want to get on the field. You can get some good ones. And so, yeah, the majority of these like Power 5 and Group 5 guys are still going to end up kind of moving down, whether it's to G5 or FCS. And so you can find some good ones though. And I think Texas State is one of those programs that has certainly tried to flip this really quickly. In year one, you saw what they're able to do at Incarnate Word, and I think you have to have a lot of optimism about kind of their talent evaluation and what they're able to do there. So, I think that quarterback situation for this staff, I think I was pretty excited for that Malik Hornsby addition for them this spring. Mm-hmm. We just haven't had a chance to really see what he can do. Obviously, he's one of the fastest quarterbacks in the country. And so what kind of thrower can he become? But to add a veteran to that room in Finley, who's certainly motivated after, Auburn decided to go in a different direction at quarterback and bring in Peyton Thorne. I think that's a really good competition. And certainly Texas State has been in need of great quarterback play here for a while now.
Well, Baylor's going to see one of the two or both at some point in early September, which I mentioned this a minute ago when we brought up the story that they have a more name quarterback room than Baylor does with Shapen. Of course, he has a name because of a couple years ago, and then Sawyer Robertson. So that's a little bit interesting. A couple of notes, and Max, you don't have to respond to them, but just the chat room is always really, really good. Pay the players, problem solved. Tumas just said, pay them, make them sign contracts they honor, and the institution honors those contracts. We know that I don't know if it'll ever get to that because of something legal or whatever states recommend or whatever it is. But there's a lot of ideas out there, but I don't know if it's ever going to change.
No, you're right, though. I mean, that idea, when you hear coaches describe the problem, it's hard not to sort of be like, well, if you don't want them to leave, I suppose you can make them contract employees. But that's, will we ever cross that bridge? I imagine we probably will someday. I don't know when.
Max, thank you. Great stuff. You and Bruce Feldman, theathletic.com. Again, the story is in theathletic.com, and